Today we're exploring a vertical rib stitch that looks like braided rope on both sides. As you'll see as we work through the video, the effect is due to the creative use of stitch orientations. First, we'll explore the orientation of stitches and how they're impacted by different knitting styles, as this is a key feature of this stitch. Then we'll look at the compound stitches used for this stitch and how they combine into the rope rib stitch, and we'll explore a way to work this stitch pattern more efficiently. At the end, I'll show you the details of this striking scarf, and especially the connection between the vertical color blocks. So let's knit. For Western style right-handed knitters like me, each stitch is normally oriented so it faces left. That is, the right leg of the open stitch is in front of the needle, and as the working yarn travels from right to left over the needle, it goes over the needle from front to back. For continental knitters, the working yarn is held pulled to the left. So for the knit stitch, the right needle goes into the old stitch so it's open, and then I wind the yarn over the right needle from front to back. For English style knitters, the working yarn is held pulled to the right. So for the knit stitch, I first pull the yarn under the needle and then over, from front to back in the same way. You can see even before finishing the stitch that the path of the working yarn is the same as every stitch on the needles, that is, oriented left. For the purl stitch, it's very similar. For continental knitters, yarn in front and pulled to the left, yarn over the right needle from front to back. For English knitters, yarn in front, pulled to the right, yarn over the needle from front to back. Again, even before finishing the stitch, you can see the path of the yarn matches the left orientation of all the other stitches, that is, front to back. For this stitch pattern, understanding how the stitch orientation affects the look is key, so we'll explore a few alternative styles. Interestingly, many left-handed knitters, my sister is one, knit exactly in a mirror image so that stitches are oriented right. Even more interestingly, a good friend of mine knits left-handed, but with the stitches oriented like mine, that is, oriented left, for both knits and purls. If you've ever seen Portuguese-style knitting or videos from Eastern Europe, you may have noticed that the knit stitches are created the same, oriented left, but the purl stitches are often created by winding the yarn under the right needle, so as the yarn travels from right to left, when the stitch is completed, the yarn goes from back to front, causing them to be oriented right. This is normally balanced by the knit stitches on the other side worked through the back loop, or more accurately, the needle into the open stitch as before, but from the right, because the right leg is now in the back. This prevents the stitch from becoming twisted, like if you work it from the left. For this stitch pattern, we'll be purling this way, and you may find that it's actually a bit easier to catch the yarn on the needle. The rope rib stitch is a 4-stitch, 4-row repeat, where the first 2 rows are worked the same and the last 2 rows are worked the same. I call these reversible stitch patterns double row patterns. I have a few more videos with double row stitch patterns. They're linked below. I've cast on 2 repeats of 4 plus 2 selvage stitches, so 10 stitches. To make the first row a bit easier, I've knit a setup row by repeating knit 2, purl 2. I've marked side A so it's easier to follow along. The first 2 rows are worked this way. We'll look at the compound stitches first and get back to the stitch orientations in a minute. Rows 1 and 2, lift the right stitch over the left stitch. Then knit each stitch in the new order and purl the next 2 stitches. You can see the slant of the right stitch going up to the left. Let's do that again. Lift the first stitch up and over the second stitch. We're not changing the order of the stitches like in a cable. It's more like the Icelandic bind-off action, where one stitch goes through the other stitch. Knit the original second stitch and then the original first stitch. Notice the front of the slanted stitch is on top and disappears between the 2 knit-looking stitches. For the second row, the 2 stitches purled on the other side will be crossed like in the first row. The next 2 rows are very similar, but with this slant of the left stitch going up to the right, which requires an important change. I'll show you the basic compound stitch first, and then we'll make an improvement to the flow. So rows 3 and 4, slip the right stitch purlwise, then the left stitch knitwise to change the orientation of the second stitch. Slip both stitches back to the left needle. Now move the left stitch over the right stitch. This time, knit the original second stitch from the right to avoid twisting it. Knit the next stitch from the left and purl the next 2 stitches like before. One more time. Keep the orientation of the first stitch as is, change the orientation of the second stitch, and put both stitches back. Lift the second stitch over the first stitch and knit it the way it's open, that is, from the right. Knit the next stitch from the left and purl 2 as before. I'll do it again because there are lots of steps. After knitting a few stitch repeats like this, it's clear that the knitting would be smoother if we could avoid having to change the orientation of the second stitch each time. To do this, we can affect the second stitch when it's created, so it's oriented right and doesn't need to be changed just before it's worked. That is, work the first purl on the other side of the fabric with right orientation. As we learned earlier, to construct the purl stitch with a right orientation, all we have to do is bring the yarn under the needle to create a right-oriented stitch. As we create the stitch, the yarn will come over the needle from back to front, creating the stitch oriented to the right. There are several alternatives now for this stitch pattern. This is the easiest way I've found. I've started a new swatch as the change starts immediately in the setup row. So for the setup row, knit 2, purl 1 by winding the yarn under the needle, and purl 1 by winding the yarn over the needle. Rows 1 and 2 become: lift the first stitch over the second stitch, knit 1 from the right, knit 1 from the left, purl 1 with right orientation, and purl 1 with left orientation. Rows 3 and 4 become: lift the second stitch over the first stitch, knit 1 from the right, and knit 1 from the left. Purl 1 with right orientation, purl 1 with left orientation. The mirror image is created by the slant of the front leg of the stitch on top matching the orientation of the stitch. That is, when the slant is to the left, the orientation of the top stitch is to the left. When the slant is to the right, the orientation of the stitch is to the right, or opposite of all the other stitches if you knit like me. In this way, the yarn comes from the purl stitch next to it, either on the right or on the left, and disappears between the 2 stitches. So in general, for each row, pull 1 stitch over the other in alternating directions, knit 1 from the right, knit 1 from the left, purl 1 with right orientation, purl 1 with left orientation. Isn't it satisfying? It's almost a 1-row repeat. Now that you've seen the right-oriented purl stitch being worked, let me know in the comments if you recognize it in other knitting videos. I particularly like the YouTube channel Binka, which is where the inspiration for this stitch came from. She's amazingly creative. I've linked her channel in the description below. For this color block scarf, I'm using Caron Simply Soft and 5mm needles. I started with 5 stitch repeats in white and 3 in black, plus 2 selvage stitches and 2 joining stitches to attach the colors in the middle. I used a slipped selvage yarn over start with a knit 2 together end to give it some loft to match the stitch pattern. If you knit a bit loosely, then the ribs on each side will overlap, like you see here. For the color join in the vertical midline, I added an extra stitch in the middle of the work for each color. The last stitch of the first color is knit from the right of the first stitch of the next color. This makes it a simple and neat color change for each row. I added a slot in the scarf by working the joining stitches as a slipped selvage for a few rows. This way I can slide the red end through the scarf and it doesn't move around as much. I also offset where the white and black section transition to the red section for some extra interest. Because of the overlapping ribs, the color change is quite smooth. For this scarf, I aim to have everything in the golden ratio, that is 1 to 1.6 for the black and white section to the total, and 3 repeats to 5 repeats for the black width to the white width. The golden ratio can be achieved by using consecutive Fibonacci numbers, and is known to be aesthetically pleasing. I'm quite happy with the result. Let me know in the comments if you're interested in the full pattern details, and I'll post a pattern on Ravelry. For the next video, I'm pulling out a stitch pattern from my collection my husband named the Crossed Heart Stitch that I used to create this infinity scarf for my daughter years ago. In some ways, it's similar to today's rope rib stitch with a very different result. I'm also working on another 5-part series like last year, this time the ABCs in acrylic. Stay tuned for that in the fall. So pick up your knitting and create something awesome. I'll do my best to respond to comments, and I'd love to hear about your favorite reversible knitting pattern. Also feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more awesome reversible knitting. For those of you still here, the last few years I've been working hard to find simple ways to feel better, what I call my daily well-being practices. This is not medical advice, I'm just sharing what works for me. Today's well-being practice is about balance and proportions. Just as the golden ratio has a pleasing balance, we should aim to have balance in our lives. Just like Goldilocks, not too much and not too little, just right. Balance with how much we eat, exercise, and sleep, aiming for a healthy work-life balance, and balancing how much we clean and tidy versus how much we knit. I'm still working on that one. Have an awesome day.